This debate is not new. It's been going on for all of my activist life. But I'd say that the cancel culture moment is much more pronounced today than it was, say, 30 or 40 years ago. There's always been a dilemma within free speech about what limits there should be, if any. Where do you draw the line? Do people have a right to say whatever they want? In theory, in a democracy, they certainly should. But obviously, if you're inciting violence, if you're making false, damaging allegations against people that are untrue and harmful, if you're engaging in threats, menaces, or harassment, then that is not legitimate free speech. Now, in the past, I have been involved in quite a few cancel culture campaigns. In the 1970s, I was involved in the Anti-Nazi League, opposing the neo-Nazi National Front, which conducted quasi-terror campaigns against Black and Asian communities. And I thought that that was absolutely right to no platform those extreme fascists who were threatening and menacing our minority communities. In the 1990s and the earlier part of this century, I was involved in many campaigns to cancel Islamist preachers who were being given invitations to speak at our universities, even while they were saying things like that men and women should be segregated, saying that Jews deserve to be killed, that Sufi Muslims or Shia Muslims, depending on which sect they were involved in, should die, that they were apostates, they were heretics, saying that LGBT plus people and women who have sex outside of marriage should be executed. And I make no apology for supporting their cancellation because of the ideas they're expressing, which are beyond bigotry, beyond hatred, but actually advocating, endorsing, and glorifying violence. I think there are possibly three red lines where free speech can be legitimately restricted. One is making false, damaging allegations, such as someone is a rapist, a tax fraudster, a paedophile, and so on. When they make actions or words that amount to harassment, menaces, threats, and intimidation, and when there are incitements to violence. Those are, I think, not legitimate free speech grounds. But of course, today's cancel culture often goes way beyond those limited grounds in terms of deciding who can speak and who can't. It is important to hold people to account. If people hold hateful or bigoted views, they should be challenged. They should be protested against. But I think that in terms of limiting their right to speak, denying them the right to speak, that is, a step that is, I think, being interpreted much more widely than, say, 30 or 40 years ago. Now, cancel culture is often described as a problem or a crime of the left, but it's equally one of the right. Many of you are familiar with the recent example of Gita Hari on GB News, who took the knee in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and was cancelled by GB News, a right-wing news outlet. So it isn't simply a left issue or a woke culture issue. What is interesting and I think perhaps disturbing about cancel culture, as it is often practiced, is that it frequently involves misrepresentation or distortion and fabrication. So, for example, I was denounced and there were attempts to cancel me on the grounds of racism because I was involved in a campaign called Stop Murder Music. This is a campaign against 8 Jamaican reggae and dancehall singers who were advocating the murder of LGBT plus people in Jamaica. And corresponding with their music, there was a huge spike in violent attacks and the killings of LGBT plus people in Jamaica. I was told by some black activists that this was a racist campaign against black people, black music, and against Jamaica. It clearly was nothing of the sort. The race of the singers was irrelevant. It was their incitements to murder which was the issue. Likewise, when I called out Islamic extremists who were saying that women who defy traditional Islamic laws and moral codes should be beaten, should expect to be killed by their families, and indeed those who have sex outside of marriage should be executed. I was told that was Islamophobic, that I was colluding with an anti-Muslim witch hunt. Well, again, there was no demonization of Muslim people per se. It was targeted narrowly and exclusively at those who advocated these violent crimes against other people, and in particular, against other Muslims. The shocking thing is the prime victims of Islamist extremism are not white people like me, but fellow Muslims. And I have dealt with many, many cases here in Britain of honor killings or attempted honor killings of Muslims by their own families or by extremists. The left, and I say this with some regret as a left-winger myself, the left is often silent about this. Indeed, not only silent, but when people like me champion these causes, we are denounced as Islamophobic. And again, there were attempts, unsuccessful, to cancel me on account of that. Another example is, some years ago, I signed a letter condemning violent attacks and threats in the debate about trans issues and women's rights. The letter simply said that it's wrong to resort to violence, that these debates, these discussions, these disagreements needed to be dealt with in a civil way. There was nothing in that letter that said a word against trans people, yet because I signed that letter, I was deemed to be transphobic and colluding with transphobes. And again, there were attempts to cancel me. Now, none of these attempts have ever succeeded. So I'm not playing the victim here. You know, I fought off those attempts, but others have not been so lucky. I think of the Iranian feminist and communist Maryam Namazi, who has had not only attempts, but successful attempts to stop her from speaking because she's spoken out for women's rights against Islamist extremists in defense of Muslim women, a culture she herself comes from. Another thing is that a lot of the cancel culture often ignores the intention and the context. So people may say things that are mistaken or wrong, but it's clear from their history and background that they never intended to say that. So, for example, sometimes people will use the wrong pronouns, not because they're trying to misgender people or deny their gender identity, but just because they didn't realize the person was trans or non-binary or gender fluid. But they will often be called out and denounced in a very, very harsh, unforgiving way because of a genuine mistake. If you look at context, I can remember in the 1990s when the LGBT plus group Outrage that I was involved in sought to reclaim the word queer. It had traditionally been used as a term of abuse and a put-down, but we sought to reclaim it as a symbol of pride and affirmation. But often when we use the word queer in a positive context, we were still denounced as colluding with homophobia. Now, quite clearly, if someone calls me an effing queer, that is a derogatory, insulting, and homophobic intention. If I talk about defending queer human rights, celebrating queer culture, I'm affirming, I'm celebrating, I'm supporting that. So when we look at what people say, the context in which they're saying it, and the intention is so important. But often when it comes to cancel culture, those factors are ignored. Often there's also a rush to judgment.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit IAI.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.